I'm going to start with about a 15 or 20-minute presentation before we get into some of the hard work and talk about what's going on right now in the world, where we have this modern syndemic. A syndemic is two epidemics that synergize each other and accelerate each other. One of those being the COVID-19 pandemic, the other being a pandemic of misinformation that's being amplified digitally. When you look at this image here, you might think that this is somebody contact tracing COVID cases, but it's actually falsehoods being spread on Twitter and being tracked to nodes where they originate. And through some sophisticated analytics, we're actually able to follow how misinformation becomes epidemic on the internet. So we know that this is a huge problem, and it has never been experienced in previous epidemics because the rate at which conspiracies and falsehoods can spread is unprecedented. And we know that that has affected Canadians. Almost half believe at least one COVID conspiracy theory, such as it's being spread by 5G or that it was created in a lab and intentionally dispersed. We know for many decades we've been fighting misinformation. Everyone will be aware of the misinformation campaigns around vaccines. And to put a sort of a value of human life on this, we know that the largest measles outbreak in the last 30 years in Minnesota was caused after misinformation was spread amongst Minnesota-born Somali children, and we saw a plummeting in immunization rates that have yet to recover. And this was based on falsehoods being spread in person, door to door. There was a concentrated effort to convince people not to get their children immunized by non-Somali groups who were advocating against vaccines. But the anti-vax movement is just the tip of the iceberg. We know that things are much more malignant than just the vaccine situation. We know that there's myths, rumors, and lies, and actually something more than misinformation, and that would be disinformation. So when we talk about falsehoods on the internet, we start with misinformation, and I'm probably guilty of spreading misinformation by accidentally tweeting something that I thought was true. I had good intentions, but I was myself misled, and so then I misled others. Disinformation is when things become more deliberate. There's actually a fabrication or a manipulation of the truth to create falsehoods that will then spread through misinformation. So disinformation has some evil intent to it. And then malinformation goes one step further, and it's kind of the weaponization of false information. We know that there are government-associated internet organizations in Russia and in Asia that have been linked to intentionally spreading false information to often disrupt politics, disrupt government, and sow unrest. And sometimes these use health malinformation. They actually begin a campaign around a health topic, and the vaccine topic is a good one because it becomes very political and very personal to people. And so there are government-associated agencies around the world that will actually agitate a population for political gain using a health topic. So this has really led to a huge negative impact for people who work in healthcare, because the rate at which people trust medical leaders has fallen over the last 10 years from 75% to 34%. And in a global study of 23 countries, when asked, all things considered, can you trust doctors? People said, meh, I don't either agree or disagree with that. So as a physician, I find that extremely concerning. And part of the problem is that I'm not the only one that is spreading information. I kind of assume that having an MD after my name and sometimes putting on a white coat or a stethoscope, people are just going to believe me, but that's not the case. Our game isn't good enough because we're competing against people who are really good at attracting attention and followers. People like Gwyneth Paltrow and her company Goop, which spread all sorts of baseless health claims online. And so we have this very unique combination of misinformation that is spreading rapidly around COVID-19 and other topics. And that has caused an emergency of misinformation. And so in order to battle that, we need to be very creative. And the reason is that lies are like C. diff. When you have really healthy colonic bacteria, then C. diff can't really get in there. But when you have your bacteria wiped out by a moxclav, for example, all of a sudden the C. diff can kind of get its way in there. So when physician voices and authoritative scientific voices don't enter the space, then the lies and the misinformation go unchecked and they're able to propagate. And so it's not always enough just to be right. It's not enough just to have the facts and to present yourself as somebody who knows best, because that alone doesn't compete with the people who are spreading misinformation. Our game isn't good enough to live in the digital space when we're competing against the Gwyneth Paltrows. And quite frankly, we're losing the information battle to people who don't know what they're talking about. I'd like to change focus here and ask everybody just to close your eyes and think back to your childhood. And I want you to think of your favorite story, sort of your favorite bedtime story that maybe your mom or your uncle or your big sister read to you as you were trying to fall asleep. And most people will quite quickly be able to visualize something. And I don't know if anybody wants to take a minute and just shout out their favorite bedtime story. Anybody have one in mind?
Goodnight Moon is a suggestion.
Oh, yes. Anyone else have a favorite bedtime story?
Anne of Green Gables, that seems like a really long bedtime story.
Oh, yeah.
I guess if you had read it in chapters, it would be nice.
Most people will be able to go back to their childhood and vividly remember a story. And so storytelling goes beyond childhood. And the reason for that is that all the way back to cavemen and cavewoman days, we've been wired to tell stories. The human brain is connected to stories. And that's because before we had written word and before we had sophisticated language, we would tell stories through pantomime and through primitive language. And that's how history was written for many years. It was passed on from generation to generation through storytelling. And so our brains are almost prehistorically wired to recognize and emotively respond to a story. And that essentially causes an emotional connection that leads to an executive function where you buy into or reject a story. And this is very different from being able to analyze a paper, do a critical appraisal, or do a proper internet search for information. So with that in mind, I would ask the audience if you would consider yourself a health advocate. And I'm sure everybody at home is saying, of course, I wouldn't be here tonight if I didn't consider myself a health advocate. And I don't know a physician who would say, nah, I don't really advocate for anything. The problem is we're not very good at advocating through stories. When we come up with information, we tend to bury it in a fairly sophisticated language. A lot of the time now, to get your systematic review published, you actually need a librarian or an information scientist involved just who can search our literature, because it's becoming really, really difficult, even for people who have training in this, to find our stories. And our academic publications are very much our stories, but they're not accessible to people. They're written in jargon. And so I would say that generally we're bad at telling stories, and that's understandable. We're not really trained in storytelling. We have some communications training, but it's really rather primitive. And so when we think about advocacy, I think we're doing the right thing. I think everybody online wants to be an advocate and does advocate, but I'm not sure that we're doing the thing right. I don't know that there's bang for the buck there. We could probably have a much greater impact, a bigger yield, if we had better techniques. And I'll give this example here. This is from when I had just hit the road as a paramedic during Toronto SARS outbreak. I remember the confusion and the fear that was being caused by that. And here's Mel Lastman, who was the mayor of Toronto at the time. This is a still photo, but you can clearly tell that he's maybe not the most calming presence in front of the cameras. He was basically rambling on and not really, helping people understand what needed to be done to get this under control. Sheila Basra, the woman to his left, who was the medical officer of health, then took the podium. And I remember as a paramedic, terrified, going to work every day, listening to Sheila Basra going, "Oh, I think we're going to get through this. I think we're going to be fine." And her communication techniques were able to guide the city of Toronto through a biphasic epidemic of SARS, one of the probably the worst hit North American cities, certainly. But again, it's not just the Sheila Basra standing up in front of microphones. A lot of people have platforms that command attention, and they may be well-intentioned, but they are certainly not doing well when it comes to communicating the truth. So, my solution to all of this, after training as a physician and as a journalist, is that we need to bring formal training of storytelling into medical curricula. And I hope that's why we're all here today. And I hope that an hour from now, when we log off, you go, "Oh, wow, like I'm actually going to communicate differently. I'm going to try to structurally change the way you think about storytelling by introducing you to journalistic techniques." And so obviously, as someone trained in journalism, I use the media to advocate, be that through large publications like the Globe and Mail, or big radio networks like CBC, or smaller niche networks where I'm targeting a specific population. Really great to target millennials through Vice News, for example. And so there's lots and lots of different avenues where I can say, okay, what is my advocacy goal? And then who am I trying to reach? And once I understand that, then I know what media partner I want. And a lot of people go, "Blair, I think you're wasting your time. The media landscape, it's a graveyard, right? Everyone's going out of business. There's no more advertising dollars. It's kind of a wasteland. 5 or 6 years from now, there won't even be any newspapers or TV channels." And that's just not true. That's a misperception. And I say that with data behind it. There's more cell phones than people on the planet. And so everyone has a device now. And through that device, they access news all the time, be it through their Twitter or Facebook feeds, or be it by going to a news app. Many of you today probably logged into some form of either curated news or direct content news app to see what was going on. This idea that there's a decline in revenue is not seen across all media platforms. Yes, there's a dip in print media as people transition to online, but that is not to say that there's no money in media and no consumption of media. It continues to rise all the time, and ad spending is actually going up. There's more dollars being pumped into the media than ever before. You can see that print, yes, has declined quite significantly, but all other platforms are actually seeing an increase in revenue. And so this has made news companies like the New York Times and Vox and the Washington Post profitable. And so there is money in the media, and the media are looking to create good content. And to do that, they need people with the information, people with the facts. Journalists themselves don't have the facts. They're trained to go out and seek them, verify them, and put them together in a way that people understand. So the bottom line here is that more and more people are consuming more and more stories than ever before. And we have smart audiences out there, and they seek smart stories. People are really savvy when it comes to media. 10 years ago, clickbait was a big problem, but people get it now. People can spot clickbait from a mile away. They're out there for the authentic story. And of course, now the digital platforms have allowed us to tell stories in different ways. We have podcasts, we have short video clips that can be on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. There's a whole bunch of different ways now that we can tell stories. So now we're going to get into the crux of it. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes wrapping up this lecture by telling you the key things that you need to know in order to think like a newspaper editor, in order to think like a journalist. And so I'm going to try to teach you what's called news judgment, which is how to spot a story that would make it onto the CTV Evening News, onto CBC Radio, The World at 6, or onto the front page of the Globe and Mail. And the first thing that we need to remember is that we need to relate to humans in order to get people's attention. And so we need to talk about people, and we need to have stuff happen to them. There needs to be a dynamic nature to the story. So most scientific studies fail in both of these regards, because instead of talking about people, they talk about a cohort, they talk about a p-value, they talk about statistics, but they don't actually talk about what that means to a person. Now, this sounds very counterintuitive because I'm not allowed to bring up anecdotes when I work with Dr. Chan in the emergency room. If she said, Blair, why did you treat that patient with epinephrine? I can't say, well, this one time, because she would say, that's an anecdote. I don't really care about your anecdote. I want you to tell me about the evidence around this. But that's not the same as when we communicate the evidence to the public. We don't want to use statistics off the top because people don't relate to them. We want to talk about people, personal stories, and then we can get into the statistics and the details. But in order to get people's hearts open and minds engaged, we need to talk about a person where something has happened to them. A classic example of how to operationalize this, I come from a cardiac arrest research background. Rather than talk about how a drone could deliver a defibrillator 3.5 minutes faster and cause a 3-fold increase in your chance of survival, I would do a story about Martha, who lives in cottage country, whose husband arrested, and she had to do CPR on him for 37 minutes before the ambulance got there, and he died. But new technology could level the playing field for people like Martha by delivering drones faster, because the drone can beat the ambulance. And so that's how I open that story. And I will get into the 3-fold increase and the median response times, but I don't open with that. Here are the 5 things. Consider this an algorithm for how to get your story related to people. And the first is that it must be timely. So timeliness is a bit of a double-edged sword because sometimes it feels like we're trying to sensationalize something. But if it's not timely, if it's not on people's minds, then when they see it on their feed, they're just going to move right on and click on something else. And so timeliness is something that you always have to have in the back of your mind. And it may be that what's important to you from an advocacy perspective isn't timely. And so you have to wait until it becomes timely. Sometimes you can predict timeliness. So I know that every December, when there's a big snowfall for the first time, there's going to be a big spike in STEMIs and cardiac arrests as unfit people hit their driveways with shovels and collapse on the ground. I pitched that story in September when people are still wearing shorts and t-shirts. And so some of those are predictably timely. Others, you just have to kind of seize the moment. One of my biggest stories, which is also one of my dumbest stories, was around pneumothoraces. And it became timely because this girl at a One Direction concert was screaming in the mosh pit and got a spontaneous pneumothorax. And everybody wanted to know if you could actually scream so hard that you pop a hole in your lung. And so I thought that was kind of a silly story, but it was timely because One Direction was on people's minds and people wanted to know about this all of a sudden. And if you had spent your life studying pneumothoraces, that was your moment to share what you wanted to share. And so you open with what's timely. You say, yeah, you know, can you scream your lung out? Sure. And then you pivot and you say, but you know who's really at risk for spontaneous pneumothorax? and then you get into your advocacy message. And the next bullet point I'll talk about is being really important or weird or counterintuitive. And this is tricky because what we think is important might not be important to other people. So sometimes you have to really think, what about my message is actually surprising or would make somebody go, huh, I want to click on that and read more. So thinking about the counterintuitive angle is really important. And I was trying to pitch this story on doctor suicide for a long time because we know that doctors have high rates of suicide. And every editor I pitched it to said, I feel like I already know that. Like, they're kind of alpha personalities. I think it happens to dentists and lawyers and doctors. I don't, make sense. And nobody wanted to pick it up. And then I found a program where the Navy SEALs had these techniques to stay resilient in battle that had been loaned to doctors. And so soldiers were training doctors in these resiliency techniques. And so I pitched this idea of Navy SEALs training doctors, and everybody loved it. And so the first paragraph was about the Navy SEALs, and the next 7 paragraphs were the story that I had been trying to pitch for the last year. So that's one way of trying to make it counterintuitive and weird or interesting to the reader. Once you get their attention through good writing and good reporting, you can suck them into that story and they will get to the bottom and you'll get your advocacy across. The third bullet here is also the most important, and that's that you must have tension or debate. Nobody wants to read an advertisement for a hospital or for a device company, something that's all rainbows and puppies and everything is wonderful, because people know that that's not authentic. People want to know, well, what's the challenge here? What's the tension? Where's the debate? And this is where, as physician advocates or healthcare workers who are advocating, we sometimes differ in opinion from our public relations teams in the institutions at hospitals, who have an organizational duty to be risk adverse and not want to bring any disrepute to the hospital. And I think that they are overly sensitive to risk. And so they won't tell important stories because they fear there will be backlash. And I don't think those fears are usually justified. So always wonder, what are the two sides of this story? What's the debate here? Where's the sharp point? What is really at issue? Because if you can identify that to an editor is going to go, this seems worthy of public discourse. I think this should be in the public sphere so that that debate can happen at a wider level. And we've certainly seen great examples of that in this pandemic and also in the recent Black Lives Matters movement in the United States. I've seen dozens and dozens of tweets and statements released by hospitals and universities around North America in regards to that movement. And you can tell the difference between the authentic ones that talk about the tension locally. They'll say, they'll go so far as to say, we have a problem at our institution, versus the other ones that say, thoughts and prayers and we stand in solidarity, but don't really contribute any tension to the story. There's no acknowledgement of a problem. It's more just sort of typical ramble that that doesn't really advance the issue at all. The last 2 points I'm going to put together here because this is where you have value for journalists. You have access to what's happening. You know the problems before anybody else does because you work on the front lines and you have expertise. And so you'll know of a problem when it's starting to happen. And you'll also know of things that are not in the news, things that are underreported. And you've probably said to your colleagues, man, I can't believe that this hasn't been in the newspaper yet. And so by being on the front lines and by having expertise, you kind of see what's coming down the pipeline. A good example of this was when everyone was talking about the opioid crisis. At least where I was working, we were seeing more crystal meth than we were seeing fentanyl and hydromorph and oxycodone overdoses. But nobody was talking about it. And I brought this up at a meeting with a national group of doctors, and everyone said, oh, actually, we have the same problem in Winnipeg. We have the same problem in Edmonton. And so the association, the National Association for Emergency Doctors, put forward a news release saying, it's not just the opioid crisis. And that went viral because people were like, whoa, there's another drug out there that's causing a lot of problems. And so we were able to highlight that struggle as well by knowing that this is underreported. We had access, we were seeing it every day at work. And so we were able to get that story out there. So just to review, something that's newsy has to have stuff happening to people, and that stuff has to be timely, important, weird, or counterintuitive. There must be tension or debate. You must have access to it, and if it's underreported, you're doing really well.